knew I could depend on you.
Is this part of the exercise?
Tomozaki is a top-tier gamer in Tackfam, but he is a lonely loser with no girlfriend in real life. But one day he meets a girl in Tackfam who teaches him how to be a top G in real life. Now, he uses his biggest skill to rizz up the girls. It all started one day, when the classes ended, and Tomozaki was hiding out in the old AV room, glued to his favorite game Tackfam. He was in the middle of a match with Shuji, one of his classmates. Shuji is a top G of the class, a guy who had everything like he is dashing, solid grades, top-notch athlete and have lots of girlfriends, which you cannot have in your entire life.
Damn!
Next to someone like that, Tomozaki is a bottom G, which is an ugly lonely loser, just like some of you guys.
Emotional damage!
The only area where he didn't lose was this game. That was his one strong point. Tomozaki beat Shuji, but instead of admitting he lost fair and square, Shuji started whining about how the game was trash and blaming it for the result. He couldn't accept that he just got outplayed. He then pushed for a rematch. Tomozaki agreed, but added that if he won again, Shuji had to admit defeat properly this time. They played, and, of course, Tomozaki won again. After that, Shuji ran into some girls outside and casually invited them to stop somewhere for drinks on the way home. Once they left, Tomozaki walked out of the school alone, heading home while thinking about how miserable and pointless his life felt. That night, he was back in his room, sitting in front of his screen, playing Tackfam online against a player using the name No Name. This opponent was reading his moves almost perfectly. Tomozaki noticed that No Name had polished his counterattacks a lot, even though Tomozaki was stronger when it came to mind games and fights and building cool combos. No Name had this crazy skill for dodging those combos. Most top players usually focused on attacking non-stop and didn't lean so hard into defense like that. So it confused him why the second-ranked player in the country was so focused on defensive play. Then it hit him, No Name was letting himself get hit on purpose so he could train his defense in real matches. Tomozaki found that really impressive. When their session ended, No Name sent him a message asking if he lived in the Kana region. Tomozaki replied that he did, and then No Name suggested that they meet up in person. Next day at school, everyone was messing around, chatting with friends and having fun. Tomozaki was the only one sitting quietly at his desk, just watching them and wondering if someone like him could ever become a top G in real life instead of staying stuck at the bottom G, just like you. During break, Hinami, one of his classmates, suddenly called out to him. When he turned around, she asked if it was true that he'd been playing Tackfam with Nakamura. Tomozaki didn't know how to react, because guys, he is a V-card hold for 69 years.
What do you mean by that?
So he asked her how she even heard about that. Hinami said that it was what everyone had been talking about, then casually asked who won. Before he could say anything, Nakamura walked over, admitted he lost, said it wasn't a big deal, and told Hinami to stop chatting about it and come with him. That weekend, Tomozaki went out to meet No Name because he wanted to see what kind of person this top player was in real life. While he was reading a text message from No Name describing the outfit they were wearing, it hit him that No Name was actually a girl, not a guy like he'd assumed. He looked around and noticed a girl in a beige skirt, so he walked up to her. When she turned around, he realized it was Hinami. She was just as shocked to see him standing there. Hinami couldn't wrap her head around the fact that Nanashi, the best Tackfam player in the country, was actually this so-called loser in front of her. Tomozaki asked why she was talking to him like that, but Hinami replied that she was simply being honest. He said that some things don't need to be spelled out, and that talking that harshly to someone you barely know is just rude. Hinami gave him a fake-sounding apology for hurting his weak ego, and said he was the rude one for showing up looking like he pulled his clothes out of a trash pile. Tomozaki shot back that it's a free country and he's allowed to wear what he wants.
Yeah, boy.
Hinami said that even so, basic manners mean you at least try to look decent when you're meeting up with someone. She looked him over from his shoes up to his shirt and commented that even some sloppy guy like Sticky Joe would be dressed better. Then she added that his messy hair was painful to look at and turned to leave. Feeling insulted, Tomozaki stopped her. He told her that there was nothing wrong with how he dressed or who he was, and not everyone fits into the same pattern as people like her. He said that, unlike games, real life doesn't come with a clear rulebook everyone has to follow, and each person ends up playing a different part. Unfortunately, His part in life was stuck as the kind of background loser that rich, popular normies like her see as worthless, and he hated that she treated him that way. He told her that everyone has their own kind of value, and she had no right to force her standards onto him. Hinami replied that he was acting like someone with fake courage, and said he was the type who blamed the game, instead of admitting his own skills were trash. She told him he could complain about the world all he wanted, but if he never tried to change anything, he'd stay a pathetic loser his whole life. Tomozaki argued that life isn't like a game where you can just switch to a different character whenever you want. Right then, Hinami grabbed his hand and started pulling him along with her. Tomozaki suddenly realized he was sitting in Hinami's room, and couldn't help wondering how a bottom-tier guy like him ended up being invited to the house of a girl that hot.
We must stay focused, brothers. We must stay focused.
While he was still confused about the whole situation, Hinami walked back in wearing different clothes. Because she looked so unlike the perfect version of herself at school, the clueless idiot actually thought she is too ugly, so she had to tell him she'd just taken off her makeup, which was why her face looked different. Hinami said that changing how people see you is actually pretty easy if you put in a bit of effort. As long as you control your facial expressions and how you carry yourself, you can shape the kind of person others think you are. Tomozaki didn't really get what she was trying to explain, so she gave him a live demo, switching her vibe just by changing her posture and expression. She told him that if he could master just those two things, he could pass as a normal, in-crowd type. She also warned him not to assume her stats were naturally high just because of how she acts now. Back in elementary school, she used to live a completely average, plain life. Hinami told him that if he put in real effort instead of acting like everything was hopeless, he could build confidence and learn how to talk to people better too. Then she admitted something. She had poured serious effort into everything she did, but no matter how much she played Tackfam, she could never beat Nanashi. Because of that, she always saw Nanashi as someone more capable than her. But in real life, Nanashi was a total loser who let life walk all over him and just accepted it, too scared to push back. She said that was the one thing she absolutely couldn't forgive, finding out the only person she couldn't defeat in a game was, in reality, a worthless piece of trash. To her, that meant she was ranked even lower than someone like that, which she couldn't stand. Hinami went on to say that the game of life actually runs on a bunch of simple rules stacked together, which is exactly what makes it such an insane top-level game. She told him she was going to teach him those rules one at a time and make sure he learned how to play life like a serious pro, not some clueless scrub. Tomozaki just stared at her like an idiot for a moment, then said that even though her big emotional speech didn't really hit him the way she probably wanted, he did agree with one thing. Making zero effort and then blaming the game when you lose is the worst thing a gamer can do. He admitted she was the only player he truly respected, because when he watched her play Tackfam, he could clearly see all the effort and grind she'd put in to get that strong. Even though he still felt like there was a huge gap between how they saw the world, and that they'd never fully understand each other, he asked her to explain what she meant about life being such an amazing game. Hinami answered that life is a top-tier game, tied with Tackfam for first place in her mind, and that comment finally grabbed Tomozaki's full attention. Tomozaki's brain flashed back to the way he was treated online. In Tackfam, strangers respected him like a top G and called him insane because he was that good. But in his actual day-to-day life, nobody cared about him. He kept grinding, kept improving, kept getting results, and still the people around him acted like it was nothing. He'd been fine with that for a long time, telling himself he didn't need praise outside the game. Tackfam was already peak, so what else did he need? Then Hinami said something that threw him off. She wasn't talking about Tackfam at all. She was saying life could be just as exciting and worth playing. That hit him in a weird way, like someone was finally acknowledging effort in the only language he understood. He still thought real life was a trash-tier experience compared to Tackfam, but he also said that if Hinami's point was real, then he'd treat it like a challenge. If life was a game, he'd stop spectating and start playing. Hinami told him the first step was basically upgrading himself as a person, actual growth, not excuses. Later, when they went out, she shoved a box of face masks into his hands and told him to wear them while practicing a proper smile. The next day, Hinami made him a written goal sheet. 1. Change his posture and look enough that someone besides her would notice. 2. Get a girlfriend before their third year begins. But guys, you can't have a girlfriend before you isekai to another world. 3. Talk to 3 girls total, 2 chosen by Hinami, plus one girl he had to choose himself. When Tomozaki reached school, he decided to start immediately. He remembered Hinami saying first impressions are easier if you don't overthink it, so he went straight to Izumi and asked if she had tissues. Izumi said she didn't bring any, then asked Fuka the girl behind her if she had some. Fuka handed them over. Izumi passed one to Tomozaki, and then Izumi went right back to her friend group like nothing happened. Tomozaki used the tissue, but Fuka stared at him and asked why he was making a creepy Joker-style smile. Tomozaki got flustered and rushed out an excuse, saying his tooth hurt and he was making a pain face, not trying to smile. Next target was Minami. He headed to the next classroom where he expected to see her, but when he arrived, Minami wasn't there yet. He also remembered Hinami telling him not to attempt these conversations unless she was nearby, so he just stood there awkwardly beside a desk like a background character waiting for the scene to start. Then Minami spoke to him first, and Tomozaki's thoughts went blank. He managed to answer, but it came out stiff and weird, and Minami started laughing, saying he sounded like an old guy. While she was still laughing, Tama walked in and asked what was going on, so Minami explained it to her. In the middle of that, Nakamura and his friends showed up. Nakamura asked why Minami was acting so energized, and she said Tomozaki had said something funny. Nakamura told Tomozaki to say it again. Tomozaki repeated it, but Nakamura and his friends didn't react at all. Minami then said they probably just weren't smart enough to get a high-class joke, so she wouldn't hold it against them. Nakamura snapped back that at least his brain wasn't dead unlike hers. While they argued, Tomozaki noticed Tama watching Nakamura with a strange look and started wondering what that was about. Nakamura then tried to turn it into a dumb popularity moment and asked them to vote on who was creepier, him or Minami. That's when Hinami stepped in and shut him down, telling Nakamura to stop targeting Tomozaki just because he couldn't handle losing to him. Everyone got thrown off by that, since it basically confirmed Nakamura really had lost. Hinami kept going, calling Nakamura immature and saying that kind of childish behavior was exactly why his girlfriend left him, because she'd rather date a real man like me guys. Minami backed her up. Then Hinami said if Nakamura wanted to prove anything, he should do it. The only way that counts here, beat Tomozaki and Tackfam. Nakamura agreed. Once Nakamura finally walked away, Minami and Tama both thanked Hinami for shutting him down. Hinami acted like it was nothing, and said that backing each other up is just normal friend behavior. Later, when they met again in the sewing room, Hinami told Tomozaki he actually did okay with his first assignment because he at least tried. Then she instantly clowned him for the way he did it. Tomozaki admitted the whole thing turned weird because he had no clue what to say. Hinami told him not to worry and said he'd naturally improve once he got used to talking more. Tomozaki then asked why Tama was giving Nakamura that strange look earlier, and Hinami explained that Tama has basically zero patience for guys like Nakamura. The next day, Hinami added another rule to his training. Besides fixing his posture, he needed to practice talking while he was surrounded by people, not only in one-on-one situations. That evening after school, Tomozaki managed to jump into the group conversation Hinami and Minami were having with their friends, which completed that goal. When they reached the station, Hinami casually mentioned that Minami lived near Tomozaki and told him to use the walk home to practice a real conversation. While they were heading back, Tomozaki asked Minami how she stayed so bright and cheerful all the time. Minami said she thinks going through life with a smile is important, even when things are going badly. When they stopped at a crosswalk waiting for the signal, Minami asked if something was going on between him and Hinami. Tomozaki denied it and said there's no way a guy like him could ever land someone like Hinami. The day after that, Hinami told him he needed to learn how to bring up new topics and then expand on them so conversations don't die instantly. She gave him flashcards with random topics, saying he could pull one out mentally whenever he got stuck. She also gave him an audio recording and told him to practice with it so he could hear what sounded off and what needed fixing. Then she told him part of his training plan was spending Saturday with her. On Saturday, Tomozaki showed up late at the mall and apologized. Hinami let him off the hook, mainly because he actually dressed properly this time for their second outing. Tomozaki asked what they were doing at the mall, but Hinami didn't answer. She just gave him a smile that made him feel like something scary was coming. Then she dragged him into a clothing store and said she was going to teach his fashion disaster brain how to match outfits, calling it character creation. Round 2. She pointed at a mannequin and said copying its outfit is the easiest shortcut, because the staff put those looks together on purpose. Tomozaki said that sounded like stealing a pro's fashion sense. After he chose a look he liked, Hinami told him to go to an employee and ask to try it on. Tomozaki looked confused, because in his head, you just buy it and leave. Hinami had to explain they needed to check sizes first. When she noticed him hesitating, she called him a coward and told him to just say, "I want to try that outfit on." Tomozaki kept whispering the sentence to himself while walking over, but the moment he reached the employee, his brain glitched and he started stammering. And instead of asking to try on the mannequin's clothes, he accidentally asked to purchase the mannequin itself. Hinami just stared, wondering what kind of half-wit she'd agreed to train. After that, they went to eat. Tomozaki asked what kind of training could even happen at a restaurant. Hinami told him they were just having lunch to kill time before his hair appointment. She asked what he wanted to order, and after he answered, she suggested they share their food. Once they ordered, Hinami asked if he listened to the audio recording. He said he did, so she asked what he noticed. Tomozaki admitted his voice sounded different than he imagined and that he mumbled a lot. Hinami told him he could start improving by paying attention to his word habits and fixing them one by one. Then she said, his face naturally looks blank, so people can't read what he's feeling. Because of that, she gave him a weird practice rule. For their conversation, he could only use vowel sounds. Hinami said the whole point was to force him to express emotion using his face, gestures, and tone instead of hiding behind normal words. Right then, their food arrived, and when the server called out Tomozaki's name, it turned out the server was Fuka. Hinami greeted her, and Fuka said she didn't realize those two were friends. Hinami explained they got closer after home economics. After Fuka left, Hinami told Tomozaki that Fuka was going to be his first heroine. Tomozaki was shocked, but Hinami explained they were going to aim for Fuka to become his girlfriend, because out of every girl he'd talked to so far, Fuka was the only one who seemed like a real chance. Then Hinami pointed out stuff Tomozaki completely missed. When he asked Izumi for tissues, Fuka already had one ready, meaning she was paying attention. And when Fuka brought their food, she called Tomozaki's name first even though Hinami was sitting right there. Hinami said, usually people greet someone of their own gender first, but Fuka spoke to Tomozaki first, which, in Hinami's eyes, meant Fuka was interested in him. Tomozaki said the idea of turning Fuka into his girlfriend just didn't sit right with him. He already suspected she liked him, so doing that felt like he was using her. Hinami replied that there was nothing strange about checking whether he actually liked her too. When she asked if he wanted to stop everything, he admitted he did feel bad about fooling Fuka, but he'd already decided to live like life was one big game, so he couldn't just quit halfway and planned to stick with it until the end. The next day in the sewing room, Tomozaki showed up looking fired up and told Hinami he'd hit one of his smaller goals. When she asked what happened, he said his little sister suddenly asked if he'd signed up for a dating class because his behavior had changed so much. Hinami wondered why that weird question made him so happy, but he said what she asked didn't matter. The point was that it proved he'd checked off one of his objectives. She told him good work. He tried to make it sound like no big deal, saying all he'd really done was copy the mannequin's clothes and get a different haircut. Hinami pointed out he'd also been fixing his face and the way he carried himself, and those changes were already showing. She told him that even if it wasn't something he reached naturally, he still chased that result on his own, so he should at least admit he'd done something right. After that, she gave him a new assignment: go out somewhere with a girl from their school who wasn't her. Tomozaki immediately said that sounded like a date. Hinami then gave him a clear target for the week: talk to Izumi at least 2 times a day. He complained and asked why she wanted him talking to another girl when he was supposed to focus on Fuka. Hinami explained that giving real time and attention to one girl would not only raise that girl's feelings for him, but also improve how other girls saw him overall. Tomozaki said it felt like a sneaky move, but she told him a loner like him wasn't in any position to worry about that yet, and should save that kind of concern for when he actually had a girlfriend. In the end, he stopped arguing and said he'd follow her plan. Later during class, he tried starting a conversation with Izumi about their English homework, but she said she'd already finished it. He tried to keep things going with another topic, but the talk died quickly and she just walked off. In his head, he called himself a slow, clueless idiot, then snapped out of it when he got a message from Hinami saying she was going to be late to their meeting. After school, Tomozaki met up with Hinami in the sewing room. She told him not to beat himself up over how things went with Izumi. Hinami said that if Izumi hadn't already finished the assignment, the conversation probably would have gone smoothly. She told him to keep trying to talk to her, but when he started acting unsure, she smacked the rice cakes he was holding and bluntly told him to toughen up. For the rest of the week, Tomozaki kept trying to start conversations with Izumi and kept failing. Every time they met up, Hinami would lecture him about it. By Friday, he tried asking if her cardigan was new, and when she answered that it was the same one she always wore, he felt like a complete idiot. After that, he ended up in the library, sulking by himself. While he was stuck in his own thoughts, Fuka walked over to him. Tomozaki asked why she was there, but instead of giving a straight answer, she mentioned that he was always in the library whenever their class had to move rooms. She said that whenever she came by, she would see him sitting there, and he apologized for never noticing her. Fuka then asked if he liked an author named Michael Andy. Tomozaki had no idea who that even was until she pointed out that she always saw him reading that author's books. He looked down at the book in front of him and realized he had just been grabbing something from the closest shelf every time. So Fuka assumed he was a huge fan. When she said she liked that author too, he panicked and lied, saying it was just a coincidence that she was also a fan. She then asked him about one of the books, but he had no clue what she meant. Luckily for him, she just thought he hadn't read it yet because the library didn't have a copy. Then Fuka told him she had written a story herself and wanted him to read it and give her his thoughts. Tomozaki was shocked and didn't know how to react, so he froze. She took that as him not being interested and quickly apologized for throwing it on him out of nowhere. He rushed to say it was totally fine, so she relaxed and said she would bring it to school. She also asked him to keep it secret, since she hadn't shown it to anyone else. Tomozaki asked if she was really okay with him being the first person to read it, and she said yes. When they said goodbye, she quoted a line from the author's book, and he had to look down at the book to figure out how to reply. Later that day, when he was with Hinami, she looked up the phrase Fuka had used and found out it was basically a secret handshake kind of line between fans. She told him this was a perfect chance to get closer to Fuka. Tomozaki admitted he had lied about being a fan and might have made her think he really loved those books. Hinami said there was nothing he could do about that part anymore, but if he ever got the chance to go on a date with Fuka, they could just have a good time without talking about that author at all. Tomozaki said that felt dishonest, but Hinami warned him not to turn into some goody two-shoes and mess up the whole plan by running away. She then stood by the board and told him he'd cleared his task for the week, even though he never really managed to have a proper conversation with Izumi because he was too clueless to follow her. Hinami explained that in a game, if you fail a quest, it's game over for that run, but you can start again from the beginning or continue from a save point. In the life game, she said, he could keep going from where he was while still keeping the experience he gained from losing. She announced that he'd earned some XP and ranked up to level 3. On his way home that afternoon, Tomozaki saw Izumi hanging around near the school gate and walked over, even though his mind was completely blank on what to say, just like you in front of your crush. He remembered Hinami's advice about using someone's expression or outfit as a starting point, so he blurted out a question about why she looked down. Izumi snapped back that nothing was wrong, and he was imagining things. Feeling awkward, Tomozaki apologized and was about to bail before it turned into an argument until she suddenly asked him to teach her how to play Tackfam, which completely stunned him. They ended up heading the same way, and Izumi explained that she usually went home with Nakamura, but lately he'd been staying behind to practice Tackfam every day. She said that when she offered to play with him, he told her she'd just slow. Wanting to prove him wrong, she went out and bought the game to practice by herself, but it wasn't going well. She complained that Nakamura was a clueless idiot who didn't get anything. Izumi also told him that Erica had confessed to Nakamura and he just brushed her off. Since Nakamura was always around Izumi, she assumed he liked her, but that illusion was shattered when he told her to stop trailing him like some stray cat. Tomozaki wondered what it felt like to be that messy and emotional, but he still asked if she wanted him to help her train so she could beat Nakamura. Izumi agreed right away. When he asked where they should practice, she casually suggested they use her place. I think guys, he is really going too fast. At Izumi's house, they played, and Tomozaki won. She stared at the screen and demanded to know how he pulled off those moves. He started breaking it down with pure gamer logic and terminology, which creeped her out a little. Then he suddenly got excited, saying he'd figured out the best way for her to improve. He demonstrated a specific technique and told her that if she could get it down, her training would go much faster. Izumi tried copying the move but couldn't pull it off properly. Tomozaki dug a small timer out of his bag and handed it to her, telling her to practice hammering the buttons on it every day so she'd eventually be able to do a quick hop style move in Tackfam without thinking. He also told her to memorize the combo while practicing at home and showed her a replay of a match between him and another strong player, saying that if she studied it, she'd be able to stand a chance against Nakamura. When Izumi asked how she was supposed to remember all that, he grabbed some paper and drew out the input so she could use it as a cheat sheet. She asked if he'd really memorized every single command and technique. He said he had. Izumi then questioned if there was even any point in going that far. Tomozaki answered that he played Tackfam simply because he enjoyed it, not because he wanted attention or friends out of it. She pointed out that if he's that good and knows everything, it probably isn't fun for anyone else, which would make people avoid him, and asked if that didn't bother him. Tomozaki admitted he didn't care what others thought of him. What really bothered him was setting a goal to get stronger and then failing to reach it. Izumi asked if he was honestly okay living as a loner nobody wanted around and said she'd never seen him look like he was having fun at school. He replied that life wasn't only about laughing with friends. Izumi said she couldn't picture living like that and wouldn't trade her way of life for his. Tomozaki confessed that he used to think life itself was trash, but then he met a stubborn, arrogant gamer on his level who made him realize there was more to it. Because of that person, he started putting real effort into what he did and figured out that life could actually be a pretty solid game. He told Izumi that if she ever wanted to change, she could because that's how life worked. A few days later, he met Hinami at a cafe. She told him that just because he'd hung out with Izumi and managed not to mess everything up didn't mean his work was done. She reminded him that there was another heroine in his current route and asked if he'd decided to invite Fuka out yet. Tomozaki said he was still debating it, so Hinami slid him a pair of tickets and said that if he ever have the courage to ask Fuka on a date, he should use them. On night, Tomozaki had been using the audio app on his phone to rehearse different ways to invite Fuka out. While he was scrolling through the clips, he tapped the wrong file and an old audio note from Hinami started playing. It took him a second to place it, but the clip was from the day she was clowning on Nakamura after he got dumped. What really grabbed him wasn't the teasing, though. Hinami had recorded her own thoughts, breaking the whole situation down in detail, and he realized how much effort she put into building the version of herself everyone saw at school. The next day, he ran into Fuka in the library and decided he couldn't keep pretending. He told her straight up that he'd never actually read any of Michael Landy's novels. He admitted he just grabbed the book closest to his usual seat and stared at the pages while thinking about Tackfam matchups in his head. When Fuka brought up the coded line she'd used before and asked how he knew the right reply, he explained that the phrase just happened to be printed on some random page he'd opened that day. After that, he apologized for faking it and said he still wanted to keep coming to the library so they could talk about whatever she wanted, even if they didn't like the same authors. He added that this time, he really did plan to try Landy's books properly and asked if she'd read them together with him. Fuka agreed. That night, he told himself the reason he hadn't asked her on a date yet was because the guilt was still weighing on him. He decided he'd tell Hinami he would only try to ask Fuka out once he could do it without feeling like he was tricking her. Just when he was about to leave his classroom, a couple of Nakamura's friends showed up, blocked the doorway, and dragged him off to the old media room, where Nakamura was already waiting with the console ready for a Tackfam showdown. Right before they started, the door slid open and Izumi stepped inside. Nakamura tried to chase her out, but she said she wanted to play against him too. Erica had come along with her and tried to talk Izumi out of it, saying there was no point. But one of the guys cut in and announced that Nakamura and Tomozaki were about to battle in Tackfam. Instead of leaving, the girls decided to stay and watch. When the match kicked off, Tomozaki completely outclassed Nakamura and won without much trouble. He got up like he was ready to go, but Nakamura immediately asked for another game. While they kept queuing up rematches, Hinami, who had been waiting for Tomozaki in the sewing room, tracked him down and walked into the room. He barely reacted to her arrival and kept calmly beating Nakamura over and over as the games piled up. Nakamura refused to quit and kept forcing rematches, losing every single time. Eventually, Erica snapped and told him to stop before he embarrassed himself anymore. Nakamura shot back that it had nothing to do with her, said she could leave whenever she wanted, and asked why she was even hanging around him. Erica fired right back, demanding to know why he was acting so full of himself. She said if he was only putting on an attitude because she'd once told him she liked him, he needed to knock it off. She admitted she'd only confessed to see what it would be like to date the most popular boy in class, and that she never would have tried it if she'd known he was such a weirdo. Nakamura answered that he didn't care about her opinion. Erica said he was just going to keep humiliating himself by playing against Tomozaki, and asked if he was really so dense he couldn't see what was going on. She called him a pathetic loser for failing at a game he'd been grinding nonstop, and said Tackfam itself was a dumb game. That was when Tomozaki finally spoke up. Erica glared at him and demanded to know why some gamer freak like him was even talking to her, but he told her to shut the F up. He said she had no right to judge whether a game was good or bad when she'd never even picked up a controller. He told her that people like her didn't understand what it meant to pour effort into something the way Nakamura had, with Tackfam losing again and again but still choosing to keep playing. Tomozaki said she had no right to mock Nakamura's losses when his hard work was real, and added that while he hated hearing people trash Tackfam, he hated it even more when they made fun of someone else's effort. Izumi jumped in for Tomozaki and said there was nothing weird about being really into a hobby. She mentioned she'd been playing that fighting title lately too, so she kinda got where he was coming from. Erica, already done with all the game talk, spun around and walked off with her crew, and as soon as they were gone, Izumi's tough act collapsed and she sank down, totally drained. Nakamura told her she didn't need to pick a fight with a girl acting like the class queen, but he still thanked her for backing him up. He packed away the console, said he wanted another round someday, and left with his pals. When the room finally emptied and only Hinami and Tomozaki stayed, he pointed out it was the first time she'd just watched everything, without saying a single thing. A bit later, those two met up at a diner. While they ate, Tomozaki brought up how Nakamura had eased off on picking at him. When he asked if she'd nudged anything behind the scenes, Hinami sidestepped the question, and instead asked if he was actually going to invite Fuka out. He said he was getting there, then pulled 2 film passes from his jacket and, almost on reflex, asked if she wanted to use them with him. Hinami turned down that slot because of her after-school group, but told him they could catch a different showing once she was free. That simple plan left him weirdly pumped. He couldn't tell if it was because a gorgeous classmate had basically lined up a little outing with him, or because it felt like his life was finally shifting into something more interesting, but he decided not to think too hard and just went along with it. The next week, before homeroom, Tomozaki mentioned to Izumi that Nakamura's big day was coming up. She instantly freaked out and demanded why he'd bring that up, making him wonder if he'd stepped on a landmine. During lunch, Mizusawa, one of Nakamura's pals, came over to talk. Thinking Nakamura wanted something again, Tomozaki asked if he was being called. Mizusawa laughed and said no, he just wanted to say he felt the same way about what Tomozaki had said back then, and that it was pretty sick how honestly he spoke. He also told him not to forget there were classmates quietly in his corner. That evening in the sewing room, Tomozaki told Hinami about the chat and said Mizusawa had suggested they all hang out sometime with her and another girl. Hinami approved and said he should be the one to invite the girl as practice for his quests. Tomozaki said he was thinking of asking Izumi. When she asked why, he explained they'd talked about Nakamura's big day and that if Izumi wanted to pick up something for him, she could always check with Mizusawa or Hinami. He worried he might be assuming too much, but Hinami was sure Izumi would want to, so he made up his mind to invite her. When Tomozaki finally invited Izumi to join the outing, she turned him down, saying she didn't want everyone trailing after her while she went looking for stuff. His brain started racing for a workaround. After thinking it through, he told her they were already planning to pick out something for Nakamura as a peace offering, so her coming along wouldn't inconvenience anyone. That flipped her mood instantly. She admitted she'd only refused because the whole thing felt awkward, then grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him while going on about how nice it was that he wanted to get along with Nakamura. Once she snapped back to herself, she let go, sat down again, apologized for freaking out, and said she'd be happy to join them. After school, Mizusawa stopped Tomozaki at his locker and said he could tell Tomozaki had some kind of plan going. He pointed out that Tomozaki had cleaned up his look lately, was suddenly close with Hinami, and had even asked Izumi out. Then he jokingly asked if Tomozaki had been studying a book called How to Become a Togji. Tomozaki, embarrassed, admitted he actually had read it. That night at dinner, his phone lit up with a notification. an invite to a group chat with Izumi, Hinami, and Mizusawa. He stared at it, overthinking whether he should join. His sister told him to put his phone away while they were eating, but when she glanced at the screen, she asked if he'd been pulled into some odd group. He said they were just classmates, and she replied that she knew what it was like dealing with people you didn't really want to interact with. When he asked if she was having trouble talking to others, she said that even if she was, he'd be the last person she'd go to for advice. Back in his room, he realized he was panicking over nothing and finally accepted the invite. That weekend, while he and Hinami were waiting for Mizusawa and Izumi, Tomozaki was busy trying to fix his expression and get into social mode. Hinami told him to stop freaking out, reminding him he was the one who agreed to hang out and even tacked shopping onto the plan. She told him to quit whining and treat the day as practice for the assignment she'd given him. Mizusawa showed up, and Hinami instantly flipped into her bright, teasing persona, which caught Tomozaki off guard with how fast she switched. Izumi arrived soon after, and as he watched her chat naturally with the others, he wondered if he'd ever be able to slide into a group that smoothly. Once everyone had gathered, they headed into a shop to look for something for Nakamura. Izumi stared at the shelves, totally unsure what to pick, then turned to Tomozaki for help. He blurted out the first idea that came to mind, and to his surprise, she actually thought it was useful. She turned back toward the display, then suddenly tapped his shoulder and nodded toward Hinami and Mizusawa, quietly telling him there was gossip at school that those two were going out. Tomozaki reacted out loud, but inside, he was thinking about the mission Hinami had set earlier. He needed to get the group to go along with at least two of his suggestions. She'd explained that if people followed his lead, he could nudge the group's overall vibe for a while, and with enough practice, he'd be able to do the same thing with even bigger crowds. Tomozaki was at a cafe table with Izumi, sipping drinks. She asked if he'd finally picked a present for Nakamura. He admitted he still hadn't decided and tossed the question back at her. Izumi said she was stuck too. Tomozaki told her she already had something only she could give. She asked what he meant, then caught herself and brushed it off like he wouldn't be any help. He told her not to underestimate him and described Nakamura as a guy who loved games, looked sharp, and always kept his hair on point. Izumi suddenly lit up, called him a genius, and decided to buy hair wax for Nakamura. A moment later, Mizusawa and Hinami arrived, and Izumi shared her idea. Mizusawa said he knew a shop that carried that kind of stuff and offered to guide them there. While they walked, Hinami kept shooting daggers at Tomozaki for not stepping up with ideas like he was supposed to. Inside the store, Mizusawa tested a sample on Tomozaki's hair, styling it a bit before they grabbed the product for Nakamura and headed back out. Catching his reflection in the glass, Tomozaki decided he should stop tearing himself down over his looks. After that, he went over to Mizusawa and Izumi and told them what kind of gift he'd chosen for Nakamura too. Once the shopping was done, Mizusawa suggested grabbing food. Everyone said yes, except Hinami, until he mentioned a place with cheese pizza, and she instantly changed her answer. They ate, then split up and went home. Later that day, Tomozaki messaged Izumi, asking where she'd heard the rumor about Hinami and Mizusawa. She replied that basically everyone in their class already talked about it, and it came up all the time. On Monday, in the sewing room, Hinami told him he'd failed his assignment. Tomozaki argued that he'd at least suggested going to the electronics shop, but Hinami reminded him the goal was to get two of his ideas accepted, not just one. She asked what he'd picked up from the outing. He said Mizusawa's ideas worked, though the first store was pricey. Hinami pinched his lips and told him to stop putting himself down, adding that nothing there would have suited Nakamura anyway. She explained that a proposal doesn't need to be perfect. If you sell it with the right attitude, people will follow. He tried to push back, but in the end, he had to admit her logic tracked. During homeroom, the teacher brought up the upcoming school council race and asked if anyone wanted to be the next leader. Hinami stood up right away, which didn't shock Tomozaki at all. When the teacher asked if there were any other challengers, Minami raised her hand too. She glanced over at Hinami and said she planned to win for sure. Later, in the sewing room, Hinami told Tomozaki their regular training sessions would have to pause for a bit because of the election stuff. Instead, she handed him a new mission: help Minami with her campaign. Since Minami was friendly with basically everyone, Hinami said working with her would be good practice for his social skills. Tomozaki wasn't convinced. He said he didn't want to drag Minami down and be the reason she lost. Hinami brushed that off and said it didn't matter who helped Minami. There was practically no chance Minami would beat her anyway. Still thinking about that, he left the room. In the hallway, Minami came flying around a corner and almost crashed into him again. After he apologized, he used the moment to ask if she'd let him help with her run. She turned him down on the spot, saying she couldn't rely on someone like him. That afternoon, he went to the library but didn't read a single page. He just sat there, clearly distracted. Fuka, at the next table, noticed his mood and asked what was wrong. He said he was thinking about the council race. Fuka said she'd been wondering why Minami decided to throw her hat in at all. Tomozaki guessed it was because Minami wanted to change how the school worked. Fuka said she felt like Minami also wanted to change herself, and added that she'd understand if that was the case because she, too, wished she could improve things about herself. Tomozaki was caught off guard by how honest that was. She nervously begged him not to repeat it to anyone. He agreed, and quietly thought her shy side was adorable. That night, he kept replaying that talk and wondered what someone as outgoing as Minami would even want to fix about herself. The next morning, on his way in, he saw Minami standing by the front gate, greeting students and asking for their support. When he got closer, she introduced him to Yumi, a younger club member she'd already picked as her main helper. Minami also apologized for calling him useless when he'd offered before. He said he wasn't upset and headed off. A bit later, he spotted Hinami in a different area doing her own pitch, with Mizusawa beside her as support. Tomozaki thought that was a smart choice, since Mizusawa was smooth with words. Later that day, Minami nearly ran into him in the corridor again. He told her to stop running around like the building was on fire. She laughed and apologized, then showed him a printed sheet with her promises and ideas. After reading it, he told her it needed some fixing, so he brought her to the room with the copier, so they could redo the layout and print a cleaner version. When they were done, she thanked him. Tomozaki told her that since planning and wording weren't her strong points, he'd handle the thinking side of things whenever she ran into problems that needed a bit of strategy. Minami liked the sound of that and said it would be cool to tell people she had a brain working behind the scenes. She also admitted she needed extra help because Yumi usually had club practice after school and couldn't always stay. Then, she asked why he suddenly wanted to help her. After thinking it over, Tomozaki said he wanted to challenge Hinami. As a gamer, stronger opponents made him more fired up, and Hinami was the toughest boss he knew. Minami teased him for trying to sound cool, but said she felt the same way. She admitted she'd been feeling discouraged about the whole thing, but now that he was backing her, she felt more confident. Tomozaki told her he'd added a little trump card into her new flyer. As part of that idea, they headed to the gym to talk directly to the sports teams and gather support. At the gym, Minami rushed over to Tama and shoved her face close, sniffing around like my girlfriend. Tama complained that she smelled like sweat and dust, but Minami clung to her anyway. An upperclassman walked over, tapped Minami on the head, and scolded her for getting in the way of practice. Minami quickly said she'd come to talk about the upcoming vote and quietly shared her idea to buy an electric pump for all their sports gear. The senior said it was a smart move, since every ball club would find it useful. That evening, Minami and Tomozaki sat together in a park. Minami asked why he was going so far just to stand against Hinami. Instead of answering, he tossed the question back at her. Minami said people only remember whoever ends up in first place. The person in second just fades into the background. She told him that no matter what they did, she always came in behind Hinami, and she wanted to prove she could be more than a permanent runner-up. The next day, they moved on to the next step. Tomozaki went back to the gym and had Tama stand in different spots while he played a sound from his phone. When he finished, he asked which place sounded the loudest, and she pointed it out. When he didn't leave, Tama asked what he was doing. She said that if it was for Minami, she didn't mind helping, but warned him not to work Minami too hard because she tended to take on more than she could handle. Tomozaki said he'd watch her. Later, he met Minami again. She said she had talked to the freshmen and hooked them with the idea of putting air conditioners in every classroom. Tomozaki knew the older students wouldn't buy that kind of promise, which was why he'd aimed the pitch at the youngest group. He handed Minami a draft of a speech he'd written, and they adjusted it together, unaware that Hinami was quietly watching from down the hall. The next morning, at the school's gathering, the people running for council took turns speaking. Hinami went first and laid out almost the same ideas she and Tomozaki had discussed before. He was stunned at how easily she hyped everyone up. It felt like she could flip the crowd's mood with just a few lines. Yumi followed with a short message backing her. When Minami's name was called, Tomozaki slipped to the second floor and played the audio he'd prepared. Minami timed her lines with the sound, and the students reacted just as they'd hoped. After she finished and rushed backstage, she suddenly hugged him, leaving him frozen. Outside the hall, they ran into Hinami and Mizusawa. The girls congratulated each other on their talks. Mizusawa said he hadn't realized Tomozaki was helping Minami, but before Tomozaki could reply, Minami stepped in front of him and proudly called him her ace. Hinami said they should get going, since they were still rivals until the vote ended. Watching them leave, Minami remarked that seeing those two side by side made the rumors about them feel pretty real. When the big student council vote wrapped up and the results were read, Hinami ended up taking the top seat. After that, Tomozaki and Minami escaped to the roof with some juice, trying to cool off the bad mood. Minami said she lost this time, but next round she'd push hard enough to actually win. Tomozaki couldn't tell if she was genuinely fine with it or just acting cheerful, but he agreed that one loss wasn't a reason to drop what they were aiming for. Later, in the sewing room, Hinami met him like usual, and asked if he was the one who came up with Minami's speech idea. Tomozaki admitted it was his plan. Hinami laughed, saying she knew only he would think of something that weird and bold. He said he'd hoped it would raise Minami's chances, but they still lost anyway. Hinami told him the plan itself was great, and he didn't need to trash himself over the result. Tomozaki grumbled that she'd played dirty by twisting the promises they'd talked about. Hinami replied that if he ever helped Minami again, he should keep a few strategies secret, since Minami had a habit of saying too much. Then she showed him her phone and reminded him that now that the whole council thing was finished, it was time for him to clear his go out with a girl mission. After that, he lingered in front of the library, staring at his screen, until Fuka walked up and asked if he was going in. Inside, he kept hesitating, trying to find a way to invite her to a movie, but his courage kept slipping. Fuka noticed how weirdly he was acting and asked if he was okay. He started mumbling through an invitation, and when she realized he was trying to ask her out to that film Hinami had mentioned, she got flustered and quiet but listened. He finally spit it out properly and asked her to go see it with him, and she said yes. On his way out, he spotted Tama by a hallway window, staring outside. He walked over and she asked if he'd just left the library, then said Hinami and Minami were still practicing together. She told him that ever since the vote, Minami had been pushing herself twice as hard and said she wished Hinami wouldn't drive her so much just so Minami could feel on Hinami's level. Her words made Tomozaki think back to what Minami had told him before, how she wanted at least one moment in her life where she finished in first place. The next day, Tomozaki was talking with Hinami when she casually mentioned that Minami had started running before she even arrived. He was caught off guard. He hadn't known Minami was doing extra laps before their usual practice. Hinami said, putting in more work than everyone else was fine if you were aiming for something, but there are problems that effort alone can't fix. After they split up, he ran into Minami in the hallway. He told her Hinami had said she'd been pushing herself. Minami replied that the election had eaten up her time, so now she was trying to catch back up. She said she was heading to the cafeteria for lunch, while he mentioned he'd just grabbed something from the convenience store. When she walked off, he suddenly wondered if he'd just turned down a chance to eat with her. That evening, he spotted Tama by the field and went to stand beside her while Hinami and Minami ran laps. He said he could tell Minami was going all out because of the loss, and asked if she'd always been like that. Tama explained they hadn't been close at first. In their first year, she barely talked to anyone, but Minami kept coming up to her every day. Tama tried ignoring her, but Minami never gave up, and eventually they actually became friends. After that, Tama slowly started connecting with other people too. Tama added that Hinami had once pulled her aside and admitted Minami had asked how to get close to her. Hinami's advice was just talk to her regularly, but Minami turned it into constant bugging instead. Hinami made Tama promise not to bring it up, since Minami would be mortified if she found out. Because of that, Tama said she doesn't try to stop Minami when she decides on something. Minami always dives in seriously and means well. Over the next few weeks, Tomozaki noticed Minami drifting off in class and wondered why she was going this hard. At the library, Fuka quietly commented that Minami was clearly trying to keep up with Hinami. When he asked how she knew, Fuka said that as a writer, she spends a lot of time watching how people act so she can build believable characters. That made Minami easy to read. Hinami, though, felt like a locked journal she couldn't quite open. Leaving the library, he found Tama watching the field again and joined her. She said Minami had been overdoing things since the council race, and she wasn't sure whether to drag her away from practice or let her push through on her own. On the way home later, Tomozaki finally asked Minami if she was exhausting herself just to beat Hinami. Minami said she had no intention of stopping after one defeat and wanted to keep fighting to prove herself. The next day, Hinami reached the field and saw Minami already running. They trained together, and as Minami ran, she remembered their first match. When Hinami's team had beaten hers, she'd hated losing, but her teammates said they were okay with second place because they'd given everything they had. In the present, Minami stumbled and almost fell, making Hinami tense up, but she managed to catch herself. Later, Hinami told Tomozaki she was worried about how much Minami was wearing herself out. He said he'd noticed too and asked why Minami was so fixated on surpassing her. Hinami answered that it wasn't her story to share and suggested he talk to Yumi if he wanted to know more about Minami's past. That evening, it started raining. Tama and Tomozaki were relieved, thinking the weather would finally force Minami to rest. But then they noticed someone running on the field. They rushed outside and realized it was Hinami out there in the rain, not Minami. The next day, when practice time came around, Tomozaki saw Minami leaving school instead of heading to the field, so he followed her to the station. While they waited for the train, he told her he'd heard about the middle school basketball game between her and Hinami and asked if that was where this rivalry began. Minami said that after the game where Hinami had beaten her, she went to watch another match Hinami played in. That time, Hinami's team lost, and when the winners were announced, Hinami cried. Minami said she understood those tears because she knew how much work Hinami had put in, and that was when she decided she wanted to aim just as high. When they entered high school, Hinami complimented how she'd played back then, and they became friends. But over time, Minami kept ending up behind her and realized she could never shine as brightly. Tomozaki tried to tell her she was just as amazing, but Minami brushed it off, said she'd forgotten something at school, and headed back, leaving him alone on the platform. The following week, Hinami mentioned that Minami hadn't shown up to morning runs or weekend training, which only made Tomozaki more uneasy. Later, he overheard Tama quietly asking Minami if it was true she'd left the track club. Minami said she'd thought it over for a couple of days and decided stepping away was the best choice. Hinami walked up mid-conversation, and Minami apologized for quitting. Hinami told her she'd always enjoyed running beside her, and watching them talk made Tomozaki wonder what was really behind Minami's decision. After school, Minami called out to Tama that she was heading home. Before Tama could answer, Tomozaki jumped in and suggested they all go together. Tama even said she'd skip her workout so the three of them could take the train. Minami apologized to Yumi for bailing on her and left with them. While they waited on the platform, Minami tried to chat about random things until Tama suddenly asked if she hated Hinami. Minami fell silent, then said she could never hate someone like her. Hinami was kind and amazing at everything. Even so, tears started to fall as she admitted that standing next to Hinami always made her feel smaller. She confessed she envied her and was scared that if she stayed on the same team with those feelings building up, they might twist into real hatred. She said she respected how hard Hinami worked, but didn't believe she could ever reach that level. Tama leaned in, lightly nibbled Minami's ear as a joke, then pulled her head against her chest and started rubbing her hair. She told Minami she might not top grades or sports, but nobody could beat her when it came to looking out for other people. Tama said she liked Hinami too, but Minami was her personal number one, and if Minami wanted so badly to be first, she was already the top fool in their group. Minami laughed through the tears, bit Tama's finger, then squeezed her in a crushing hug. The next day, Minami apologized to the coach and the rest of the relay team, and they accepted her back. In the sewing room, Hinami handed Tomozaki a fresh assignment. Give Nakamura his birthday present and keep a conversation going for 3 minutes after Yuzu handed over hers. Tomozaki forced himself to walk up, past Nakamura the gift, and got a simple thanks. He spotted Hinami, signaling that his time still wasn't up. Panicked with nothing left to say, and blurted out a dumb question, asking if the rumors about Hinami and Mizusawa being a couple were true. Later that day at a cafe, the girls roasted Tomozaki for asking Nakamura such a dumb question. Hinami casually turned to Minami and asked if the rumor was even true, and Minami said there was nothing going on between her and Mizusawa. She then apologized for acting off all week and handed everyone a strange cat keychain. Tomozaki thought it looked cursed, but the others loved it. Summer break started soon after. For Tomozaki, that just meant Hinami had more time to stack new quests on him. Over a meal at a family restaurant, she told him his main goal for the whole break was simple: turn things with Fuka into an actual relationship. He practically shouted. He insisted she was way out of his league, but Hinami reminded him they already clicked and, for whatever reason, Fuka clearly liked being around him. She promised to coach him and suggested they run a practice date first. She sketched out a fake date route and said that on the real outing, he'd act like he planned everything himself. First stop, a clothing shop. She made him try on outfits, helped him pick some shirts, then handed him a backpack as a present. When he tried to refuse, she said they could trade and chose a small metal pin for herself, keeping it even after he complained it wasn't a fair swap. Next, they hit a game store for a single round of Tackfam, which he won, and then a cafe, where Hinami showed him how to add contacts and told him to message Fuka. He typed something out, and Hinami read it aloud, which made him want to disappear, but she said it was fine and told him to send it. She warned that Fuka might take a long time to reply, so he shouldn't freak out if the message sat there all day. Instead, Fuka answered almost right away, saying she was free to hang out anytime. Hinami grinned and said that basically proved she was into him. Not long after, Hinami invited him on a trip with her and some classmates. He panicked again, but she said it was a good chance to build guy friendships and level up his social XP, so he agreed. They met at Minami's place to plan, but her grandmother was visiting, so they moved the meeting to Tomozaki's house. In his room, Minami immediately started hunting for hidden magazines and only found controllers. Then they sat down to talk about the trip and how to set things up so Izumi and Nakamura could spend time together. Remembering Hinami's advice, Tomozaki made sure to join in properly, toss out his own ideas, and push back when he thought Mizusawa's suggestions were off. On his way back from dropping dishes in the kitchen, Mizusawa stopped him in the hall and pointed out that he'd bought hair wax, but clearly wasn't using it. Tomozaki admitted he didn't know how, so Mizusawa styled his hair for him. When they went back to the room, the girls immediately fussed over how different he looked, and Hinami teased both boys. After everyone left, Tomozaki decided this summer might actually be fun. The next day, he met Fuka for their real movie date. After the film, they grabbed something to eat. While they talked, he overthought every line and started relying on the safe topics from Hinami's flashcards, which made him sound stiff. Fuka eventually said he'd gone from being easy to talk to feeling strangely hard to speak with, and he was sure he'd blown it. On the way home, though, Fuka explained she just struggles talking to guys in general and hadn't meant only him. She said she really enjoyed their day and wanted to go out again. Relieved, Tomozaki called Hinami while walking back and gave her the rundown. She told him to invite Fuka to a fireworks show next, so once he got home, he sent the message. On the day of the trip, while they were on the train, Hinami quietly gave Tomozaki his mission. During the outing, he had to either make a suggestion, tease Nakamura, or disagree with him at least 3 times. She also told him to work on getting closer to Mizusawa, since he seemed like the easiest guy to turn into a friend. When they arrived, they grabbed a bus to the camp. Hinami handed out chores and deliberately paired Izumi with Nakamura, while she teamed up with Tomozaki to handle the fire. When he asked why she stuck him with her and grouped Izumi with Nakamura, she said the other jobs didn't suit him, and if she paired him with anyone else, he'd just freeze like a bugged NPC. She added she was tired of acting perfect all the time, and being with him let her drop the act a bit. After they ate, Nakamura suggested they all go down to the river. While they played in the water, one of the guys scared Izumi with a crab, making her slip. Nakamura caught her before she fell, and everyone watching was relieved. Their accidental event went just like they'd planned. Later, they went back to the cabins. Nakamura asked if the camp had any cards, and Mizusawa said they could borrow a deck. Nakamura called over to Tomozaki, clearly about to send him to get them, but Mizusawa cut in first and changed the topic, asking about the older girl Nakamura had been messaging. Tomozaki silently thanked him. Without that, he was sure he'd have been treated like the errand boy. They started talking about the girl. Nakamura said she texted him even though she already had a boyfriend, and he didn't really care because she looked good. Mizusawa asked what Tomozaki thought, and he said she was just stringing Nakamura along, using that moment to tick off a disagree from his mission. Nakamura told him to shut up, and the others laughed. When things settled, Mizusawa asked if Nakamura liked anyone else. Nakamura admitted there was a girl he seriously liked, but she always talked to him about another guy she was into. A bit later, while Nakamura and Tackfam arm wrestled, Mizusawa and Tomozaki sat with Minami and Hinami. Mizusawa repeated what Tomozaki had said earlier, and the girls mentioned that Izumi had already told Nakamura she liked someone. Mizusawa added that Nakamura had told them his crush liked a different guy. Then Nakamura yelled for them, and they all headed to the girls' room to play cards. During the game, Mizusawa pointed out how serious Hinami and Tomozaki looked over a simple card match. That was when Tomozaki realized he'd gotten so focused on winning that he'd forgotten about his social task. When the others started complaining about their bad luck and Nakamura laughed at them for being terrible, Tomozaki jumped in and reminded him his own record was even worse, flipping the joke back on Nakamura and scoring another tease. Curious as always, Minami asked Mizusawa what was going on in his life lately. Nakamura cut in and exposed him, saying Mizusawa had been flirting with a girl from another school. Mizusawa brushed it off, saying he wasn't sure he'd ever date her. Later, when he headed to the bathroom, Tomozaki went along and used the walk to talk more. He asked about the girl, and Mizusawa said they texted and flirted, but he wasn't sure if he actually liked her. When Tomozaki asked why he'd chased someone he wasn't sure about, Mizusawa dodged the question. That night, they went to the baths. On the girls' side, they talked about how to nudge Izumi and Nakamura closer. In the boys' bath, everyone went quiet when they saw how unexpectedly built Tomozaki was. On the way back to camp, they split into groups, Nakamura with Izumi, Minami with Mizusawa and Tackfam, leaving Tomozaki walking alone with Hinami. She said she'd train him, but he didn't get it until she suddenly shrieked and latched onto him like a scared heroine. A bug flew up when he tried to step on it. She screamed again, then reached for his hand, and wrapped her arms around his neck, staring at him like she was about to kiss him. His brain short-circuited, but when she leaned in, he instinctively pulled back. Later, everyone took a group photo at the cabin. Nakamura teased Izumi until she fled with him, and Mizusawa said the two had already made plans to hang out after camp, which the others counted as a clear mission clear. That night, Hinami called Tomozaki to her room to review his progress. Footsteps came down the hall, so he hid just as Mizusawa walked in and took his spot. Mizusawa started talking with Hinami about Nakamura and Izumi, saying they were hopeless about each other's feelings, but honest in a way he respected. He said he admired how Tomozaki hit problems head-on, then admitted he often felt like he was just watching his own life from outside. Hinami replied that she was always trying to match what people expected, and that most people wore a mask until they found someone they could relax around. Listening from his hiding place, Tomozaki realized she was only showing Mizusawa a version of herself he could relate to. Eventually, Mizusawa straight up confessed he liked her but knew she didn't feel the same yet, and wanted to figure himself out, while slowly trying to win her over. At that point, Tomozaki stepped out and apologized for eavesdropping. Hinami explained he'd run off when he heard Mizusawa coming so it wouldn't look suspicious, then suggested they all pretend it never happened. The next day, they returned home. Hinami later messaged Tomozaki, telling him to confess to Fuka after their next outing. They met for a fireworks festival, and on the way there, he told her stories from the trip. When the fireworks began, he realized he hadn't used any of Hinami's prepared topics, and when he asked if talking like this was better, Fuka said it felt more natural. After the show, he still couldn't bring himself to confess and just suggested they head back. At the station, he texted Hinami, and she came to meet him. She asked if he'd confessed. He said no, and explained that he'd dropped all the scripted stuff, and Fuka still said she'd enjoyed talking with him. He told her he finally understood he'd been struggling before because he wasn't acting like himself. Hinami said he should still keep backup plans, but he refused, saying they needed to focus on whether he actually liked Fuka, not on tactics. Hinami snapped that drifting through life without strategies was stupid. He argued that living only to chase tasks was empty. She took it as him throwing away his desire to change, pulled the badge he'd given her from her bag, told him to return the backpack she'd bought, and walked off. Watching her train leave, he blamed himself for wrecking their partnership. Days later, he was back in his room playing Tackfam when his sister called him to dinner and complained he'd reverted to his old shut-in mode. She pointed out he hadn't checked his phone and said some girl had messaged him. After eating, he finally looked and saw Fuka had asked if he'd go pick up a new book with her, so he texted back that he'd go. When they met again, Tomozaki went with Fuka to a bookshop so she could pick up her new novel. Then they stopped at a diner. Over their meal, he admitted someone had been coaching him on how to talk and act. Most times he'd spoken with her before. He said he'd relied on rehearsed topics so their conversations wouldn't stall. But during the fireworks night he'd dropped all of that and just talked. He told her he liked being more outgoing, but worried his real self was getting buried. Fuka said that at first, when she pictured him, he seemed plain and faded, which made her feel they were alike. But as they kept meeting, she started to sense more color from him. If that came from someone's guidance, she said, it didn't make it fake. He could stay himself and still enjoy this brighter version of his life. That night, he messaged Hinami, and she told him to meet her where they'd first spoken. When she arrived, he said that before she showed up, he believed life wasn't meant to be enjoyed. She'd made him see it could work like a game where he chose his moves. But he didn't want life to turn into nothing but strategies and tasks. Hinami argued back, so he told her the reason she couldn't beat him in Tackfam was that she hadn't decided what she truly wanted, while he had. He said he'd keep moving forward while figuring out who he was, and wanted to prove through his actions that her way wasn't the only one. She called it nonsense but agreed to try things his way. Later they had lunch, and Hinami gave him his next assignment: get a part-time job. At the interview, he found out Mizusawa already worked there, so they ended up as co-workers. Not long after, he went shopping with Hinami, Minami, Mizusawa, and Izumi to help Izumi choose clothes for a date with Nakamura. No one could settle on one outfit, so when she asked him, all he could say was that she looked good in every choice. On another outing with Minami and Tama, Minami bought a strange keychain that reminded her of Tama. Tomozaki picked one and later gave it to his sister, who only kept it after hearing Minami liked the same design. Between shifts at his new job, going out with Fuka, and playing Tackfam, his days shifted into a busier routine. What about you guys? And that's it for today's video guys. Watch the following video, and I will catch you in the next one.